Okay, welcome. Now in this clip, we're going to actually start talking about CloudWatch dashboards. So when I select dashboards on the left side of my screen here, we can actually see I already have a few already created. Now, if you recall, we actually made this Pluralsight Andrew demo dashboard when we were working through this from the Insights menu in Systems Manager. And we can see we have our widgets that we added. So let's go ahead and go back to dashboards here, and we're going to walk through this again. We're going to create a new dashboard. So I'm going to click Create Dashboard. Let me go ahead and give this name the default name, if you remember, which is CloudWatch-Default. So I'm going to click on Create Dashboard now, and it brings us to this Add to Dashboard screen, which is where we select our first widget type. Now, before we go through with this, let me show you some examples of what these look like. A line graph is going to look like that. So you can see there's lines here. And in this particular example, there's just dots because there's not multiple invocations on that graph. But depending on the metric you're measuring, those lines might be connected all the way throughout that graph. We have a number widget, which is what it sounds like. It displays a text number on the dashboard itself. We have a stacked area, so this has a shaded portion underneath that line. It basically builds off of that first line widget that we see on the left of the screen and builds in some shading and some coloring to make it a little bit easier to picture, and it makes it look nicer. And then finally we have text, which is Markdown. Now I don't see this one used very often, but it's good to know that they do offer it. You can basically have a Markdown page as a widget on your dashboard. So it allows you to do a lot of different handy things. Anything you can do in Markdown, you can actually do in this text widget. Now, one last important thing is remember to always save your dashboard after adding your widgets. I stressed that in the Systems Manager module, and I'll stress it again. Anytime you make a change or add a new widget, you need to save your dashboard. So let's go back to the console now. So for this one, let's just go ahead and do stacked area. We'll click on Configure, and then let's give this a graph name. We can see here on the top left, we can click on this little edit button, and we'll call this graph 1. I'm going to click this little check mark to accept it, and I'm going to scroll down to all metrics down here. And if we scroll through this, we can see we have billing, CloudFront, EBS, logs, Lambda, EC2, and then S3 and SNS. Now, the reason we see these metric groups listed and not every single one is that's because we have only these resources within our account active. So let's go ahead and let's select SNS for now. And we can do several things. We can look by the country or SMS type. We can look at topic metrics, or we can look at metrics with no dimensions. So for this example, let's click on topic metrics here. And you can see here we have one topic. There's 4 topic names, but it's really all the same topic. It's just different metrics that are being measured. So if I scroll down, let's just go ahead and see number of messages published. So I'm going to select this because I want to see the total number of messages that were published. And I want to change this graphed metric here to a statistic of sum. So I want to see the total sum of messages published. And let's turn this up a little bit. I'm going to go to period, and let's go down to 1 minute. So that's a very active monitoring period. And then finally, I want to go up to custom here, the timeline, and let's just do 3 months. So you can see here that we've had exactly 2 messages published in the last 3 months. And that's a sum. So it's a total of 2 messages. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pause this clip. I'm going to go publish a few different messages on this topic, and then we'll come back and check this out again. So for now, I'm going to click Create Widget. I'm going to save my dashboard, remember, and then I'm going to pause this, and then I'll resume it after I publish a few messages. All right, so I posted a few more messages, 3 to be exact, and we can see here now that our graph has updated. You can see the count now is at 3. Number of messages published, 3. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, by default, when you create this widget and it gets on the screen, there's a default period here that's going to check every 5 minutes. So to speed this up, or even customize for your own stuff if you want, what we did here is I went up to Actions, and then from this you can see there's a period override. Now, within this period override, I set it to 1 minute, so it would be a lot quicker and we don't have to wait a long time. But you can see that it actually allows you to do a lot. You can do 1 second, 5 seconds, all the way up to 30 days. And what this period is the amount of time that it's collecting data. So for every 1 minute, CloudWatch is going to post an updated amount of data on this graph here. So I set it to 1 minute, but usually it's going to be set to auto or 5 minutes. Now, since I changed that, I'm going to save my dashboard again. And the next thing I want to do is open up this Actions menu again. Now, what we can do here is we can make a new dashboard. We can save this one as a copy to a new one. We can favorite it. We can rename, delete, and we can view and edit the source. And then here at the bottom, we can actually even enter full screen, which is kind of a cool little thing if you have maybe a monitor or a display that's strictly for monitoring this dashboard. Now I'm going to exit full screen here. And the next thing I'm going to show is we can add another widget. So using this add widget button that I just clicked on, it brings us back to this main screen. So if we wanted to, we can select another widget, we can configure it, and we can go back in and measure metrics again if we wanted to. So let's just do Lambda. I'll do by function name. We'll do invocations for get SSM parameter. And another handy thing here is if you're looking for a specific metric name or even a resource name, you can click on this little drop down here, this little tree, and you can actually search for this only. So if I wanted to, I can look here at invocations and I can search for this only. And we can see that I only have one function here that's being measured, but if I had more than one, it would show invocations metric name for multiple function names. And you can see that it's populated here in this search bar. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to go to graph metrics. I'm going to select the sum again, and then we'll do a period of 1 minute. Now I'm going to save this. So create this widget. I'm going to save my dashboard. So now if we had any invocations on that Lambda function, it's going to populate this number widget for us. We don't have any, so that's why it's a dash dash. But one last thing I want to show you up here, we have our time frame again. So if I went to 1 week, now you can see a better view of what a stacked area graph looks like. We see 2 originally, and then it went up to 3 during this period. Now let me save this dashboard, and the very last thing I'm going to show you is if we go back to this overall screen here, if you remember, they had this where we can scroll down and we can see our default dashboard now. And that's because we named this CloudWatch Default. So now it shows up when we scroll down on this overview screen because of the name we gave it. Now that's going to do it for the dashboard portion of this module. Go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll see you in the next one where we're going to start talking about alarms. Okay, so let's start talking about creating CloudWatch alarms. Now before we dive into this, there are 3 pieces of information that I want you to know. The first is period. Now a period is the length of time that it takes to evaluate our metrics. And this ties into the next one, which is evaluation period. So this is the number of your most recent periods, which you remember are the length of time that we're evaluating, that you want CloudWatch to measure. So it's monitoring the most recent configured amount of periods, and that equals your evaluation period. So if you want an alarm to be a little bit less sensitive, you might set this for a higher number of evaluation periods and then change your thresholds around a little bit. And the last one we have here is our data points to alarm. Now, this is the number of data points within an evaluation period that must be breached to trigger your alarm. Now, you can see how all of these tie together, so let's go ahead and go to the console here, and we're actually going to load up this alarms section underneath the CloudWatch page. You can see we have 3 alarms already defined, but for this clip, let's go ahead and create a new one. So I'm going to click up here on Create Alarm, and this brings us to the Create New Alarm screen. Now, this is where we are first going to select a metric that we want to set an alarm for. So I click Select Metric, and this brings us to a familiar screen. We actually just saw this screen in the last clip. This is where we're actually setting up a graphed metric for CloudWatch to measure. So let's go ahead and set one of these up. I'm going to scroll down here and let's do Lambda. So I'm going to click on Lambda. I'll do by function name because we only have one. I'll do invocations here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to graphed metrics. Let's configure this to be a sum with a period of, we'll set it for 1 minute, and I'll select this metric. So now you can see here our namespace is AWS Lambda. We're measuring the number of invocations. We're using this function, get SSM parameter here. We have a period of 1 minute, and then our statistic is our sum. So the total number of invocations on this function. So if I scroll down here, we're going to see our alarm details now. Now this is where we give it a name. So let's just give this a name of too many invocations. And the description will do the same. So let me just copy this and paste this in description. And you can see we now specify the whenever piece. So whenever invocations for this resource is, and this is where we select 4 different options. It can be greater than or equal to, less than equal to, greater than or less than. And then we set our number here. So for this one, let's just go ahead and greater than or equal to 2. And we'll make this pretty sensitive. We'll set it for 1 out of every 1 data point. And if you click this little info button here, you can see for a 1 minute period, which is what we have, there's only 1 data point every minute. And you can see they talk about how I was mentioning, if you want to have it to be a little bit more sensitive, you're going to have this trigger on less data points out of your total that you're measuring. So if you wanted to trigger on 1 out of 5 data points, it's going to be a sensitive alarm. So we'll leave this now. So anytime we have invocations greater or equal to 2 for this get SSM parameter function, we're going to go ahead and cause an alarm. Now, the next thing we see is additional settings. So we can treat our missing data as several options. Missing, we can ignore it. We can treat it as bad, so this breaches our threshold and causes an alarm, or we can just set it to good. Now the default is missing, and this will just say insufficient data, and then nothing will happen. So we'll leave this right now, and we'll move on down to the bottom where we see actions. So what actions do we want to take? And you can actually see here there are 3 different options. We can do a notification, which is what we see here. We can do an auto-scaling action, so if we had an auto-scaling group, we could select it from there and then take a certain action like expand or maybe shrink back in this auto-scaling group. And then the last one we have here is our EC2 action. So we can spin up other resources or do something else related to EC2 metrics, but since we're doing a Lambda metric, this is not coming into play. So we're going to go ahead and use this default notification action here, and whenever this alarm is moved to a state of alarm, which we can change to OK or insufficient, but we'll leave it at alarm, we want CloudWatch to send a notification to my SNS topic. So this is going to send me a text via a message that's sent to us from CloudWatch to SNS and then to my phone whenever this is an alarm. So I'm going to go ahead and down here and I'm going to click on create alarm. So we've now made our too many invocations alarm here. So we can see it's insufficient data. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause this video for a little bit and let this catch up, and then I'll resume. And once I resume, we'll actually start trying to trigger this alarm. Okay, so I gave it a few minutes just to make sure we weren't going to experience any funky behavior. And you can see it's set at insufficient data still. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to my Lambda console. I loaded this function, and I'm just going to go ahead and start testing and invocating this Lambda function. So I'm going to click this several times here, and I'm going to pause this video while I do this, and then I'll go back. Okay, so I've tested it several times. Let me go ahead and close this, and I'm going to refresh this alarms page. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to pause this one last time here, and I'm going to let this catch up, and then we'll see that it moves to an alarm state. All right, you can actually see that it's now picked it up on the graph that we have invoked this function 8 times. So in a second, we should see this switch to alarm because this has now breached this threshold that was set at 2. And there we go. It's now moved to an alarm state. What this did was actually text me with the topic name and then the alarm name. So I see on my phone this little picture right here, which mentions the alarm name and the region that it's being triggered from. So now if we give this another minute or two, this should actually move back out of the alarm status because the period that we're measuring, which is 1 minute, is going to have 0 invocations because I only invoked this during that 1 period of this clip where I was trying to test this alarm state. So I'll pause this for now and then we'll resume when it's out of this alarm state. Okay, we can see now that it's moved out of alarm state back to insufficient data. So this alarm has moved into the insufficient data stage because the data is missing, and you can see that here at the bottom. Now the last thing I want to show you in this clip before we really move on here is over here on the left side. You can see we have where we can shortcut to our alarms that are currently in an alarm state. We can see our insufficient ones, and we can even see our okay ones. So what I'll do here is I'll go into this, let me modify this alarm, and I want to treat missing data here as good. So we'll go ahead and save changes here. Now the last thing on this page is billing. So this allows us to create a shortcut here or take a shortcut to look at billing related alarms or create billing related alarms. And you can see that I created 2 here, one that measures for anything over $10 within 1 data point for every 6 hours or anything where it goes over free. And this is a very typical setup for people that are just trying to dive into AWS and be okay. Now we can see here that one of these switched to okay. So if I refresh this, we can see our too many invocations has switched to OK. So this allows us to very quickly navigate what alarms are being triggered. Now that's going to do it for this clip. I'll see you in the next one where we're going to start talking about CloudWatch logging.